Hi, everyone, and welcome to another For Data Learns. I'm Jennifer Dawes. I have my co-host with me, Danushki De Oliveira. And today, Danushki, do you want to introduce our guest?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we have Jacqui Moore, popular name and figure in the Tableau community. She is a 2023 Tableau visionary, so congratulations.
Yes, awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, and she's also a Tableau ambassador. She's been a Tableau ambassador for 3 years. She's a co-lead for the Tableau user group in Boston. And she also co-leads the real world fake data community project. So today, Jacqui is going to talk to us about noodles versus joins, which is, relationships versus joins. Sorry, I keep calling it noodles. But definitely a topic that Jennifer and I are super interested in. So the flow is yours, lady.
All right, thank you. So yeah, I think relationships have been kind of mysterious or scary to a lot of people. I was one of them for a long time. I will admit I was a late adopter of relationships. But there's a lot to really like about them once you get to know what the nuances of using them are and how to make them behave the way that you want to. And so I have a couple of example data sets that I'm going to use to try to do some examples of different ways that you might see behavior in relationships versus joins and how you might get around some of those behaviors that you don't want or to force it to do what you do want. So let me share my screen.
And I think the
Exciting.
one thing I hear a lot of people talk about is relationships are better because it helps you avoid those lovely LODs. So the more I can understand this and utilize it, I'm ready.
Yeah. All right. So here I have, I'm working on a Spotify data set. So I pulled that, and that's the examples that I'm using. So I have a data set that is albums, and I have a data set that is tracks. And I will pull these in to Tableau. And so you can see if you use a join, right? I'm going to join albums to tracks on the album ID. And at this point, I have to decide whether I want a left, right, inner, full outer join. And that's going to stick with the data source for all of the analysis that I do.
Mm-hmm.
So if I look at my join data source and I want to look at the albums with the number of tracks, you'll see that that seems very high. I've never seen an album with that many tracks. Have you? That would be a lot of tracks.
It's a lot of work.
So there's that duplication that we're talking about where we need to use LODs. And then if I do a relationship, right, same relationship, they're related on album ID, but I have the albums node here and the tracks node here. And if I look at this by album name and number of tracks, you'll see that that's a more reasonable number of tracks per album. So what we don't have to do with the relationships is because Tableau is going to use the native level of detail of the table that it's connected to dynamically do these kind of LODs behind the scenes, right? It's still happening. But Tableau can intelligently make those decisions. So I don't have to go to my data source, right, and create an LOD where I have to, you have to know what level of detail do I want this to be at? If you have multiple fields, which one are you going to use? Right? You have to do weird aggregations like the max of the tracks Let's see, where is it?
And I'll say, I think a lot of people find the LOD calculations, table calculations as cumbersome because I think a lot is just not understanding and seeing what's happening in the data and just not
Yeah.
sure what level do I need to be at? What am I fixing on? It can be challenging and I get that. So it's
Yeah,
exciting to
especially in
know.
the real world where you're dealing with a lot more complicated data, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Whereas here you
Jackie,
can kind
when
of
you
eyeball it. Go ahead.
sorry. When you did the relationship connection, you didn't have to do anything. You just brought in your two data sources and Tableau did that for you.
So I
Isn't
brought
that
in
kind
my
of
two data
scary?
sources and it will automatically try to pick a common field.
Yeah.
It's not always going to be the field that you want, or it's not always going to know, right? There's no matching fields here. So you can pick the fields here. So you do still need to know the relationship between your data. And you know, which table you want to be your root table would be the one that has the most relationships to the different objects that you want to bring in. And you can move these around too. So you can, swap. If I decided that actually tracks should have been my first table, I can swap it.
I didn't know that. So I ran
Um,
into a challenge where I had, one to one, one to many. Like it was quite the nested, lots of relationships and connections, right? Lots, maybe 6 or 7 different tables all coming off of the root. And the problem I ran into was not realizing when I started to structure this for something I was working on is that the level of granularity for my data, that root table was at a higher level than some of the other tables. And so long story short, by the time I got to the end of it, I still had duplication. So I think that's really handy to know. You can just quickly swap because you want that root table to be, I would imagine, your most granular, right?
I usually go from it's often the least granular if you're working in kind of a star schema sort of model where you've got, a highly aggregated rate. So like here I have albums and then tracks, and then I would kind of go down in the grain.
Okay.
It can get confusing if you're going up and down across the nodes, right? So if I like went from albums to tracks to artists, then I would see some funny behavior.
Okay, that makes so much
But
sense
kind
now.
of like
Okay.
the lowest common denominator, right?
Like
I
your
usually use
primary
this.
keys.
Yeah, that's
Cool.
so awesome and probably underutilized if I had to say.
Yeah, and in earlier versions, you weren't actually able to swap the nodes and move them around. So it did, if you later decided that you needed to reorganize the data model, it would really require just kind of rebuilding it. So that was a huge, huge add. And then, yeah, so the data duplication and not having to use LOD expressions is huge. It's not that you can't use LOD expressions, you still can. You may want to do that for things like cohort analysis or, where you really want to specify the level of detail. But this lets you use the native level of detail of the tables that you're connecting to, so you don't have to deal with so many calculations. And LOD calculations and table calculations can be very computationally heavy. They can hurt your performance too. So in a lot of cases, relationships are more performant. Occasionally, you might run into use cases where a join will be the better choice. I should also mention in the relationships models, you ever see these performance options? Tableau is going to, by default, assume that it's a many-to-many relationship. That's cardinality. You don't know how many records from each are going to be on either side. And then referential integrity. If you know for absolutely positively sure that every record in every table is going to have a match, then you can specify that they always match. I will say I very rarely use the performance options because it's just a lot more flexible and I can see what's happening as part of my own QA process if I just let Tableau use the default. It works best, in my opinion. Unless, again, you really know. And I'm never that positive about the data that I'm using.
Right. In a perfect world, it would be nice that we could eyeball it, like we were saying with a data set like this. Like, does that make sense? No, yes. Don't always have that luxury.
Yeah.
Have you run into any issues with certain data types that are more cumbersome? So the various different clients, it's hard to tell from one project to the next. It might be Google Sheets, it might be GCP, it might be like have you run into any issue where relationships don't function or limit for any type of data source?
I haven't run into anything like that in my use of it, but there's all kinds of different data sources, so I haven't seen it, but that's not to say it doesn't happen.
Can you mix and match? Like, can you join an Excel sheet to a SQL table?
You can still do federated data sources just
Okay.
like anything else. And you can also still, so you can use relationships and physical joins too, right? So if I wanted to ensure that this table was a physical join, I could bring in the table and still specify it using the original data source UI, where I'm picking the relationship between the two tables and specifying the join type. And then this can still be related to the other tables in my relationships model.
Gotcha.
You can still do custom SQL within any of the relationships nodes. So each of them kind of acts independently as its own physical data source. And then you are creating the relationship between them.
Gotcha. Sorry, we're like asking you so many questions and interrupting your presentation.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so one of the things that you'll see is with relationships, though, is so if I pull out, so I have all of these tracks. There's 96 tracks. If I pull out the album name, you'll see it went down to 86. So I have some tracks that are not associated to an album. This is one of the bigger reasons I think that people are scared of it, because they see their records disappear and they don't know why, they don't know how to get them back, right? It's really driven off of the measures that you're pulling from. So if you even just put the count field on from the table that you want to force to act like a left join, basically, I want all of the records from this table, putting any measure on the view or putting the count field on tooltip or detail will pull in those missing records. And now I have what I would see if I was doing a join, where I have a null album name and I've gotten all of my tracks.
That can be scary.
Yeah, and what's nice is that I have the flexibility to decide, though, because of the relationships model. If I really only wanted to see the ones that are associated, I can do that without filtering. It's just handling that for me. Um, Whereas if in the join, where I set everything to be a left join, what I'm going to see here is that because of the way that I established that join, everything has to be associated with an album because the album is the left part and the tracks is the right part. And so I'm losing those, but I may not even never know that they were there, right? Because I don't have that visibility. So it is really nice for exploring your data, for finding out where the mismatches are, and because you can dynamically kind of interact with it.
I'm
Do
slowly
you-
being sold.
Do you have situations where you still, even going down, like using relationships and seeing the benefits of relationships, do you have situations where you still prefer a join?
Yes. I think joins are definitely still something that I will use. I will use it if I know that my two tables are at the same grain, right? I'm not getting any benefit from relationships if there's nothing to worry about with the different aggregations and I know how those two tables are related. And that allows me to kind of hand off that data source to somebody else without them having to understand how it's going to work. It is defined, it will always work the same. Whereas relationships, because of their flexibility, can also lead to some incorrect answers if people don't know what they're working with. You cannot blend two relationship models. So if you have to do any blending, then you're going to need a physical join. And let's see, I think the other time is if you're working with a really clean, sparkling clean star schema data source, and it's like you have a really good DBA and your data is in really great shape. Again, all of that is really being handled by how the data is modeled. You've got dimension tables and fact tables, and you're not going to come across that duplication as much. So maybe a physical join would come in there. But I try to use relationships first and then go to other types of data models if it's not going to work out. Some of the things that you see with a join that you will still see with relationships is if you're trying to filter on a field that is not in the other table and you have some data sparseness, right? Like so here I have we now know that I have some tracks that don't have an album. If I filter on a field from the album, I'm going to lose any of the data associated to those records that don't match. And you can get around some of that, like with scaffolding, like using a date scaffold and using that as your filter, kind of as a go-between. Some of the same ways that you would use with a join if you have data sparseness. Those still exist. We don't get rid of them. We just have to use calculated fields to kind of create hybrid fields or use scaffolds to make up for the data that's not there.
Awesome. I think I've just begun exploring relationships. So I do like the one advantage I could say was like it's great when you know, like you mentioned, it's great when you know kind of what the tables look like and you don't have to worry or be too scared about how you're using it. But I think the greatest advantage I've seen is just like those calculations, and it definitely will speed up the dev time for creating a dashboard, right? If you're not having to do a fixed LOD for various calculations, and you can just kind of jump in and it natively is giving you the numbers that you need. So
Yep. Yeah, it can make development a lot faster. It can make your data sources a lot cleaner. You know, you have to go back and figure out how to, if somebody else is going to use that data source, then you have to figure out how to hide all those fields that they shouldn't be using.
And to
you know,
follow your train of thought, like to reverse engineer the work that somebody did, and you're having to go through like 16 layers of nested calculations just to figure out like we're averaging something, right? Like it's definitely a lot cleaner, right?
Yeah, definitely. Now, with that said, there are a couple of things where if you are going to use LODs in a relationship model, if you're used to using LODs and you've been using the physical joins, what you might notice is some interesting behavior. So if I just pull out my duration field and I do an average, this is the average duration of the tracks on that album. That's pretty straightforward. But if I tried to use an LOD to do that, I'm going to get these really inflated numbers because now I have undone what Tableau was doing intentionally. Now I have changed their ability to do that dynamically, and you'll start to get these inflated numbers again. So, just looking at it like this is, really helpful. Just pulling out a table view and kind of looking at the raw data and knowing what I should be expecting. Same with if I wanted to fix it on a different field, right? And do this and change my LOD from a sum to an average, then I get the right answer for everything that's associated with an album, but I still get a really confusing number for the nulls. So just looking at them and being aware that once you start altering the level of detail or creating calculations that go across the two tables, you might have some record loss, or you might have some data duplication that you've created by the way that you've created the calculations. So that's just one of the things that I always watch out for as I'm using the LODs is in a relationship model, is that I'm not undoing something that was already handled. And that can be a hard habit to break if you, like I used to be, were strictly using the physical model, and you come in and you start to build it in your own way and you're like, this is wrong. I don't know why. I'm not using relationships ever again. So it's really just a matter of like understanding how Tableau is doing what it's doing, and it's really based on the view, it's creating these queries against the tables in a dynamic way and accounting for the differences in level of detail naturally, which is better in 99% of cases, but sometimes you will run across cases where it is creating this interesting kind of behavior that you just have to watch out for.
Yeah, I'm curious with you saying this. The thing that keeps coming to mind is it's in a perfect world, you'll explore your data, you'll have a general high-level sense of what you have before jumping into creating that dashboard. I don't know about everybody else, but like the first step I take is I pull the data into Tableau, and I like to explore data in Tableau to just see what do I have. So with that said, do you think it's best to, I think you mentioned you like to try relationships before joins to see which is best, but do at least do a quick exploration using joins, or what does your process look like to kind of make that determination?
That's a good question. I think that relationships are better for understanding my data. And when I'm doing that exploration, like you mentioned, I'm going to use each table independently without pulling in fields from the other. And then that is going to behave essentially like if you were not using relationships at all, if you just had connected to that table. So I can get a sense of, what are the sums of my values? What is my total record count? 'Cause without that context, then how do you know if you're losing records?
Right. And how do you do any
Um,
kind of QA? How do you know? Right. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I think it's easier to be able to just pull out, you know, values and say, if I pull out duration and then by album name, okay, I can see now that I have some nulls over here. If I, pull out something else, I might be able to see the mismatches and start to get a sense of it. Um, and you do have the count field. So like this is, the old number of records field.
Mhm.
Each table is going to have one. So you can get a count of the number of records per each table. You can see which measure values go to which table, and then which ones are crossing the data sources, because those are all going to go down to the bottom in this kind of, it's not grouped with either of the tables. So it's nice to be able to work with it that way. But just knowing how your tables relate to one another and taking that time to explore, and then having a sheet that's just a crosstab view to compare what's happening with your calculations and things. Not understanding your data source, I think, is really the key. And then once you understand how relationships work, you'll start to trust them more and know when to check things more. It's
How does it
definitely not as scary as I once thought it was.
Same. I was really strongly against it. And then I thought, okay, well, I guess here we are. So
how does it work with updating the data source? Does it ever kind of, have its mind of its own and just switch things around while it is published on a server?
No, so if you're using an extract refresh, it's going to behave just like anything else would. It will refresh the tables. It will keep all of the properties that you set up. Nothing is going to change. Um, if you're using a tool to do your data preparation and then publishing it to Tableau server, like Tableau Prep, or if you're using Alteryx publish to Tableau tool, um, then it's not going to know which table is which. You're not going to be able to use those. Well, publish to Tableau tool, there is a version that you can attach the metadata for the data source file. So you can publish the tables and it kind of tells it what to do. But for the most part, like if you're using something to prepare your data like that and just publish it directly to Tableau server or Tableau Cloud, you're not going to be able to use relationships that way. But if you're connecting to a data source and refreshing the extracts on Tableau server, then it just acts like any other normal data source that you've used.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool. I think I'm slowly edging towards the non-scary part of relationships.
yeah, I think it starts like for me, it started with a small account that we were using Google Sheets and okay, let's see what this looks like. We have a couple, let's bring it in. I knew it was going to be lots of fixed LODs or trying to figure out if this could work. And I think the point on knowing what level of granularity for each table and making sure all that makes sense. And I like what you were saying about how to spot check and explore it first and doing one table at a time so you kind of can get a sense of it. That's a really smart move because I kind of got burned my first go around with it because I didn't do that. And then I was way confused with what was happening. So
Same, yeah. Same. I used it when it first came out. I tried to build something and I also got burned, and then it was a while before I came back to trying to use them again.
And
But
now I
it
use them
is
mostly. Like most dashboards I build are relationships, not joins, just simply because of the data sources I have. I feel better about having this dynamic, like you said before. I was trying to explain it. We were having a discussion internally about it. And what is Tableau doing behind the scenes? But the way you said, it's a dynamic query based on your view, right? Like, it's not bringing every piece of the data in. It's bringing in what is necessary, what you're calling up based on what you're putting in the view. And so that kind of helped, I think, but it's still hard. As analysts, we want to see it, right?
yeah. Yep. And yeah, I've definitely using the performance recorder to look at the SQL that Tableau is creating is something that I have definitely done to understand what was happening. Because I guess I have trust issues with the data.
That's so fine. We're
But
in the right line of work to have trust issues.
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, the amount of time that they can save is incredible, and the amount of flexibility that it adds to a data model. So I think they're definitely worth trying first.
Get your feet wet, get comfortable, and then decide to go all in and try it. Where do you do the performance model to see the query, the SQL? When you said that, I thought, that sounds really cool.
Yeah, so if you go into settings and performance, and you start performance recording.
Oh my God.
I didn't know this. This is a bonus.
And then you do something. And then you stop the performance recording. It will create.
Oh, this is so cool. What a way to translate and help others understand.
And so these are awesome because you can see the order that Tableau is doing things in your workbook, how long each of the events is taking. So you can, if you're working on a dashboard that is non-performant, you can figure out if there's one specific view that's causing the issue. But then you can click on the query and you can see
That's
the
cool.
SQL that was generated, and you can copy this out to Word or whatever to see the full thing, or you can expand the view, and then you can understand what Tableau has actually done with the relationships to create that view, which I think is really helpful to people who are coming from a data engineering or SQL world, where this
Yep.
idea of dynamically creating the queries is very hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Being able to show, like, this is the SQL for this view, this is the SQL for this view, is really helpful for that.
I think that's
That's
amazing
awesome.
because coming from, I think I learned SQL and Tableau about the same time, but that was my footing is really knowing SQL. So being able to, what I can't see and understand in Tableau, translate it to a language that I can understand to kind of have my own comfort. I think that's really cool. I didn't know we could do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, this is totally something new for me too.
Hey.
Yeah. Performance recordings are awesome little kind of hidden tool.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think, are there any other questions or things that I should hit on?
I don't know if I've had any other questions. It's kind of one of those things, like I said, I've been playing with, and I've gotten more comfortable with it, but I don't know that I had the logic and the reasoning to know, okay, this is why I should go this way versus this is why I should go this way. And
Yeah.
use joints versus use relationships. And I just didn't know enough. Like it was one of those things that you know enough to be dangerous. And so I've used them without really knowing a lot about the pitfalls. So I think this really helps me. And gosh, that performance recording is super cool. So
I
the
am
performance-
definitely, I have never used relationships. So 100% of the time I use joins because that's, my comfort area, and learning the LODs and understanding table calcs and all that kind of stuff is now, I'm good with that now. So that's, I'm comfortable there, but definitely today I see the use cases and usefulness of using relationships versus joins. So definitely more questions to come on when I start using this and getting out of my comfort zone.
Yeah,
I think
definitely try it. It's really nice. And it's definitely saved the performance of some dashboards that would have been monstrosities without it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's fun to take like an existing dashboard and replace the data source. Like start with a point that is kind of what I started playing with. And like, okay, if I switch this from a join to relationships, what's going to take place? Like, what am I looking at? What is the data? That could be messy, but I'm just trying to give a place to explore, I guess. I know somebody once, the only other question I had was, so like spatial files, have you done anything like that, Jacqui, with the relationships?
I haven't used them with spatial data, so yeah, I can't.
Yeah.
Can't speak to them.
Somebody may mention that maybe there are some challenges there. So definitely like pros, cons. I get everyone's comfort is, where you start. And the minute Tableau introduces a new way to manage the data, it's a bit scary and maybe we're slow to get on board, but lots of good trade-offs, I think, for using relationships.
Yeah, I think especially once you understand what's happening and what to watch out for, then you can decide what's best, because it still depends. There's still definitely reasons to use joins. So.
Absolutely. In the end, it still depends.
It depends, exactly.
It's like the number one answer for a consultant or analyst bingo. It depends. Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for spending your morning with us and teaching us some cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Thank you guys for having me. And I would, if anybody wants to go on a deeper dive of how this is working and understanding it, I think Jonathan Drummy and Keith Dykstra have the Sense Makers podcast. They have a few episodes where they really go into it even more. I would definitely suggest checking those out because Jonathan has really gotten to know how the relationships work. So definitely go check that out if you're still apprehensive of using them.
Absolutely. We'll have to
For
link
sure.
those. I was watching the start of one of them the other day. So yeah, I'll absolutely share those out. So I really appreciate it. It was great talking to you. And thank you so much for just talking through your process. I think that kind of helps me feel a little more solid on my footing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.